Jim Hinchy is joining us now, I think. I think we are live. Ron, if you want to call us to order.
So I'd like to call the May 10th meeting of the Isle of Palms Planning Commission to order and acknowledge that the public and the press were duly notified in accordance with state law. So the first thing on the agenda, I think now that we're all live streamed, we generally this time of the year have a annual legal review from the city. And in order to do that, we need to have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of an annual review.
Well, first, Ron, let's do the approval of minutes. Jim is, it shows, he is showing on my screen as joining.
Okay, so he's in process.
Okay. Yeah, so he's not here yet. But let's go ahead and do the minutes if you don't mind.
Minutes. Do we have any motion on the acceptance of the minutes from our last meeting?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Do we have any comments? Any corrections? If none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Now we can take that that motion to go into executive session. See, Sandy's coming, and
yeah, before we do that, you know, it's not lit, and this may be our first legal question that we need Jim's help with. I did not list it as being an executive session. I just had it as an annual legal briefing. Jim, is there, I guess, first of all, is there a reason to do the briefing in executive session? And if so, can we do that if it's not specifically listed as such on the agenda?
We can always go into executive session to receive legal advice. We would have to state that on the record and clearly state the rationale for that. That said, I mean, there's nothing I'm going to say today that really isn't covered in information that's accessible to the public. I mean, I'm not going to discuss any cases. I'm not, you know, that the town is involved in, and I'm not going to make any specific recommendations as to an act or an action. So I mean, I don't see any reason why, if it's the Planning Commission's desire to have it conducted in open session, to conduct it in an open session from my perspective.
that's perfectly all right with me.
Yeah, I would, without it being listed on the agenda specifically, I guess my preference would be that we just do it in open session, if that's all right with the group.
Sure.
Yep. Okay.
So I would just give a brief introduction. Jim Hinchy is the city's attorney, and I think this will be the first time he's done this, but the city historically towards the beginning of each year has done a legal orientation and just kind of a legal briefing from the city attorney. And it gives a little bit of, you know, she'll give you some advice in terms of do's and don'ts, and also give you an opportunity to, if you have any questions, specific legal questions, it's kind of a good chance to discuss those and give you his ear for a minute while we have him. So with that said, Jim, if you want to take it from there and just tell the Planning Commission what you think they may want to know about, that would be helpful.
I may be telling the Planning Commission some things that they don't want to know about.
That too is okay.
Hopefully I'll cover both. I think my former partner, Julia Copeland, probably gave this last year, and I think Sterling gave one before that. Some of you may have been on that receiving end of their presentations. Those two were brilliant. I'm a little less brilliant. So I'll try to be, I'll try to compensate for that by perhaps not being brilliant, but being brief. My intention is not for you to leave here completely educated in all of the concepts and all of the issues that I'm going to raise before you. That's not my objective. That's not capable of being ascertained. I mean, to be honest, every single time one of these issues comes up for me, I mean, I'll step back. Even though I've worked, for example, with the Freedom of Information Act for many years, I'll step back when I get a question and I'll look at the act and I'll spend some time to analyze it. And I might look to see if there are any recent cases that might provide some clarification. So the thought that you're going to walk away from here with complete knowledge of the act or anything else for that matter, I don't think is certainly not what my objective is. What I do want you to do, though, is I want to give you enough information and have you comfortable in what we used to call in law school issue identification. And that's the important concept, is issue identification. So that if something presents itself to you during the course of your duties that falls within the Freedom of Information Act, you might be able to identify that as a potential problem. And then before acting, and that's very important, before acting, then seek advice to secure clarification. And I think that's my objective. And I think we're going to get there. And the first thing I wanted to chat a little bit about is the Freedom of Information Act. Over the course of the years, it's risen from obscurity to prominence because it certainly has a legitimate public purpose, but there's also a potential sword associated with it as well. I mean, the city, from my perspective, and everyone may not agree with me, but from my perspective, I really do think that we act in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act and are very transparent. I mean, I really do believe that. And that's important because violations of the act can create problems not only for participants or those who violate the act, but also for the city in the form of an award of attorney's fees, costs, and public embarrassment, to be honest. There are some things that I want you to keep in mind. Okay, when might you encounter the Freedom of Information Act? In a number of different situations. I would guess that the most likely situation for you to encounter the act would be during the course of a meeting. And we have in our state an open meeting requirement. That basically means if there's a meeting, we must comply with the Freedom of Information Act. What's a meeting? Meeting is really any time that there's and this is important, anytime there's a quorum of the constituent membership of a public body, whether it's in person or it's by through electronic equipment that permits sort of a spontaneous discussion. That constitutes a meeting. And that's really important. And this has been clarified over the last 10 years or so. For you, as far as Planning Commission, having 7 members, anytime that 4 of you gather, that's a meeting. So if 4 of you gather at Town Hall, that's a meeting. if 4 of you gather at Page's Okra Grill, that's a meeting. If 4 of you are sitting beside each other having a beer on the beach, that's a meeting. And there may be some opportunity to parse that a little bit, but for your purposes, if 4 of you are sitting in the same room, I want you to think, I think we have a quorum and I think this is a public meeting. And then you can chat with Doug or with me to see if actually your instinctive reaction is correct. But I think the guiding principle is if there's a quorum present or the quorum of any constituent body, like the majority of town council, the majority of any committee of council, that majority being present at the same time is, for all practical considerations, at least for this purpose, I want you to consider to be a meeting subject to the open meeting requirements of FOIA. Specifically, you can't, there can't be any chance meetings. For some of you who might need translation, I have a Boston accent. So if you would insert R's where they're supposed to be, and if you remove them where they're not supposed to be, we'll probably get through this. So you can't say, well, it was just a chance meeting. And that's, so if you're on a telephone conference call, if you're on a social agenda where there's town business being discussed, that's a meeting. Recall, and this is a sort of a second guiding principle, recall that emails and text messages are public records. And as public records, they are subject to production in a FOIA request and in litigation during the course of discovery. If there's one thing that all of you can walk away from this meeting recalling, and that's everything I put in an email, I want to be comfortable with having that as the headline in the Post and Courier the next day. I can't tell you how many times I've read emails and there's some offhanded remark, and I haven't seen it at the city, but some in other places where there might be some off-color reference or whatever. That just ought not to be there. And the same thing with text messages. Now, we don't have much guidance on text messages, and frankly, don't have much guidance on emails from the state archivist as far as the Records Retention Act is concerned. But for your purposes, please recall that anything you put in an email, anything you put in a text message is subject to the Freedom of Information Act and certainly is subject to a discovery. Now, there are some other things that you need to know under open meeting requirements. You have requirements for scheduling of regular meetings, and that's going to be posted in the City Hall every January.
Jim,
yes.
Do you mind if in the while we go through, if ask just a question or two as you get
Sure.
through it? So I did want to talk specifically about email and that requirement, and get your opinion on our current situation. And this has been something that we have gotten a little bit varied legal advice over the years, and I wanted to kind of get your advice and to see if there's anything maybe that's changed in this regard. But the Planning Commission has always been told, the membership has always been told to not exchange emails on any subject. So generally, I distribute the packets, they come through me, and I ask the members, if you want something distributed, send it to me, and I'll broadcast it out to the group, and don't engage in any dialogue back and forth about the subject matter. Receive it, look at it. If there's a discussion about it, we'll have that during the actual meeting itself, but don't carry that on via email. And that's how we have traditionally carried on. And I guess the question would be, we have, during different times throughout our history, we have at sometimes had the members all using an IOP.net address, but that has proven to be challenging. Keeping up with our IT folks at the city require that the password be changed every 6 weeks. And I don't think it's an additional address that maybe not every member checks frequently. So things go missed. So it has generally been our experience that maintaining those IOP.net addresses it's caused more problems than it's helped, because I don't think that anything being emailed is ever anything other than just a packet that goes out and is also posted on the city's website. So could I get your advice on whether or not you think it's important for the members to necessarily be using an IOP.net address? Would be, I guess, question one.
Well, that's a question that can have two opposing answers, Doug. So, but likely the advice you've received in either direction is probably going to be appropriate, as one might be practical and one might be sort of a strict interpretation. The one thing that we have to keep in mind is that that emails are public records subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And there's another act that requires preservation of these public records by the city. So anytime we create a public record or a public document, we have not only the obligation to produce it if requested, but we have the obligation to store it, to preserve it under the Records Retention Act. So the first thing is that anytime we generate that email for any reason, in any manner, whether it's at the city's IP address, whether it's on a city tablet, whether it's on a city phone, whether it's on a personal phone, whether it's on a personal computer, if the topic is city business and you are a member of the Planning Commission, what you're creating is potentially a public record. First of all, we want, in direct response to your question, Doug, we want to abide by all town or all city policies. So any policy we have on the Freedom of Information Act, on text messages, emails, whatever, we need to comply with that. I personally, and I think that doing it through an IP address, not doing it through an IP address, I think either one is fine. It's a matter of our ability to satisfy our requirements. I mean, if somebody has a phone and it's a personal phone and generates a public record, then what's going to happen is if we get a FOIA request and it asks for example, text messages, we're going to have to ask each commission member to give us their phone. And we will look through the phone to determine if there are any public messages on there. So I personally, and this is not legal advice, but personally, the more we can sort of distinguish between personal communication and public communication, the better off we're going to be. Simply because no one wants to have their private messages to their doctor, to their accountant, to their financial advisor, reviewed by someone to determine if somewhere in that morass of information there's a public document. So I
Jim,
always like to see as much segregation as possible.
okay. So if, in your opinion, so say, somebody just said, we want all correspondence to and from every planning commission member for the last 12 months. My plan would be, and I think kind of historically our plan has been, since it all comes through me, I could provide all that. And I guess, my computer is certainly subject to being scrutinized publicly, but that would satisfy the requirement for the commission members. And is that, it would you have that reading as well? I mean, do you feel like that satisfies?
It may or it may not. It depends on how the request is phrased. If someone asks for all emails from, let's say, from Mr. Denton to Mr. Pierce in a 2-month period of time, you can search on the town site and use as search terms Denton and Pierce, and put in parameters as far as time. And that will pull up any material that has been sent from Mr. Denton to Mr. Pierce, or from Mr. Pierce to Mr. Denton. And that may satisfy, but it may not. If Mr. Denton and Mr. Pierce, for example, utilize other addresses, or not everything that they generate passes through the town computer, we haven't preserved that. So your search is not going to turn up those types of communication. And that's why I say that it's much better if we can. And it's not, there's a real, and that's why this is not my opinion. This is just my practical suggestion. I know that this is very costly to get all this kind of, to provide tablets, to provide addresses, to retain IT experts to assist in establishing that. It's very expensive. And not every community can afford to do that. But it's always better to have all of your communication go through the town address, because then it's a simple matter of searching for those responsive communications on the town server, and then we have it. But if people have a habit of communicating without having a copy go to the town server, then we may have to go further.
So that's, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say, though, I think you went from that practical to the strict. I think the practice we're trying to follow is that everything we do, if we communicate through or to any of the other members of the planning commission, Douglas is going to be on the email, which goes back to Douglas's critical, and for the city to issue all of us tablets just for us meeting once a month and all of that, I think would be a little, maybe a little over the top. But if Douglas is capturing everything on his address, all communicate between us, I think hopefully we'll satisfy the requirement.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. If a town employee is a recipient of the email at a town IP address, you're absolutely correct. Then you know, we're all right, as long as we always in our communications include that town
Address.
IP address. Yeah, exactly. Then we're all right. Because then what we would say if we get a request is every single email that anyone on the commission sends, a copy goes to Doug, or it's to Doug. And that's why I do like Doug's suggestion or requirement that if a member of the commission has a question or wants to present an issue, send it to Doug and he'll send it out. And that way we know that all of those communications are producible through an internal search. But you were right, Scott.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would just add to that the city certainly does not have a problem providing anybody with an IOP.net address. It's just been historically that those addresses were problematic. But if anybody wants that address, I guess let me know, and we can certainly get it set up. If that provides any of you with a, you know, if it makes you feel more comfortable, I guess we could certainly provide it. And we have done in the past. But I just kind of wanted to get, Jim, your opinion on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our biggest challenges with FOIA is that means of communication are changing every day. I mean, I'm 74 years old, so there are some aspects of communication that are very foreign to me, like the one with a little bird associated with it. But you know, I think in theory, even if we use that, and we chat about a public business, there may be some theoretical obligation to capture. I don't think it's practical, but I mean, those are the kind of things that we need to keep in mind. If I'm sitting down and I'm a member of the commission and I say, gee, I really want to get an issue out here. I want to ask a question that might be applicable to the procedure of our commission. Well, I'm not going to go on Twitter and I'm not going to post it on Facebook. That's a whole nother issue. I'm not going to do it on Facebook. I'm not going to do it with Twitter, but I may send something to Doug and ask him a question. Now we're okay. We've satisfied our obligations in the Freedom of Information Act and also in the Records Retention Act because it's retained and it's just a known way of capturing. I did mention, and I'd kick myself in the rear end if I didn't mention Facebook. Whatever you post on Facebook about any public discussion or any public business, that also is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. You know, so sites like, was it Nextdoor and places like that? I mean, those are my personal suggestion is don't go on those sites. I mean, it's not a requirement. My suggestion is don't go on those sites. Don't put anything on there that might be construed as public information, because we're going to have to do something to preserve. But that's a whole nother issue. I mean, so as long as, remember, my goal was just have you identify potential concerns. So if you're thinking about going on Facebook and having a chat about some public issue, call Doug or call me, please. Don't run on there, post it, and then call us. At that point, the horse has left the barn. So So give us a buzz beforehand. It saves me having to go to my doctor and get a prescription for anxiety medication when someone tells me that they just posted some awful thing on Facebook. Gee, was that okay? Yeah. So if you would do that, that would be grand. Now, I should tell you too, that some things, like we're not supposed to be doing any polling by telephone. That's prohibited under the Freedom of Information Act. All of our voting is supposed to be done in public. You can, and this is an issue that comes up from time to time, under certain circumstances, a commission member can attend by conference call. But there are some very specific requirements for that. You're going to have a quorum of the body that's physically present, and they have to remain physically present, that same quorum throughout the meeting. The person who is attending by conference call has to be able to hear anything that the commission members say, any public comments, and anything that's communicated by staff. So they have to be able to hear what's said. And that the public and the staff and the other commission members also have to hear what the person on remote has to say. You cannot have, or the individual presiding over the meeting cannot be remote. They have to be physically present. And you can't communicate. If you're remote, you can't have your cell phone out and be sending text messages back and forth to other commission members during the meeting. Any communications have to be heard and have to be, it's important, capable of being recorded in the minutes. But if you satisfy those requirements and you desire to attend, then you can attend, and you are considered to be present, and you have all of the powers that you would have had you been present. The sort of the next, and a lot of these are the most likely events to cause missteps. So that was the first one. Second is on the agenda. We're supposed to provide that. We're supposed to post a written agenda. It has to get provided to media 5 days before, and each member has to get a copy of the agenda. You can remove or postpone agenda items by a simple majority vote. So if you want to eliminate an agenda item, you can just by majority vote eliminate an agenda item. Or postpone an agenda item to the next meeting. You can do that by majority vote. But if you're going to insert something into the agenda, create a new agenda item during the meeting, and it's not on the agenda, I guess that's kind of redundant. If it's a new item, it wouldn't be on the agenda. But if it's not on the agenda, you need to have a 2/3 vote. And you have to have exigent circumstances described that to permit the addition of that new agenda item. And when you think of the purpose of the Freedom of Information Act, that just makes sense. And we want to do this in the open. We want to be clear and transparent. We want to give folks in our community an opportunity to speak on an issue. And if we haven't told them in advance what the issue is, then it's difficult to speak on it. But there are some circumstances, and the Act recognizes this, and the case law recognizes this, that there are some things that come up at the last minute, have to be discussed. And it's it's critical. It satisfies the definition of an exigent circumstance, and all we need is a 2/3 vote and a description of what the exigent circumstances would be. For example, there's a lawsuit involved. We're ready to settle the case. The plaintiff's lawyer says that I need to know yes or no by 12 o'clock tomorrow, and that was a statement that was made an hour and a half before the meeting. Okay, that's an exigent circumstance. So we describe that, put it on the record, get a 2/3 vote, and then we can add that item to the agenda. All right, so that's the agenda. On executive session, over the years, this has been this is just my own personal opinion, one of the most abused concepts, not by the city, but if you look at the case law in South Carolina, there's some real abuses of the use of executive session. There are limited reasons why you can go appropriately into executive session. For example, seeking legal advice, talking about personnel matters, when you're negotiating a contract. Those are all, among other things, valid reasons to go into executive session. Sometimes they're planned, as Doug referred to earlier. Sometimes when we publish the agenda, we know we're going to receive legal advice on some issue that's pending before the commission. So we can put it on the agenda as an executive session. And we describe why the executive session is going to take place. We may say that it's an action item. In other words, when you come out of executive session, you can take action on what you discussed in executive session. But there are some other things. We can't vote in executive session. We can't poll in executive session. We can't make decisions in executive session. So when the chairman announces the purpose of the executive session, it can't be, let's go into executive session. It has to be a specific purpose. And if I'm present or Doug's present and you have a question, don't just state the specific purpose and then, even though you're not sure, just you can ask us for the specific purpose and help us. We can help you phrase the specific purpose. For example, we could say, the motion, Mr. Chairman, I move to go into executive session to receive legal advice from our city council concerning agenda item number 4 and the influencing cases and state statutes that might be implicated by our decision. Okay, that's good. Then you have a vote on whether you go into executive session or not, and then before adjourning, the chairman will say we're going to go into executive session to receive legal advice, and then just repeat what the motion was. And please keep in mind that we may take action when we come out of executive session. I think that last comment is important. So someone's there that might be interested in the issue, they'll know, stick around, because you might take action on that item when you come out of executive session. Please remember that, the old adage, what you say here, what you do here stays here. Well, that's the same thing in executive session. If it's said, the discussion that occurs in executive session should not be discussed outside the executive session with anyone. As soon as you do that, then there's a risk, not an assurance, but a risk that we may, for example, waive the attorney-client privilege because you're discussing it with someone who's not a component part of the attorney-client relationship. And certainly, you may be disclosing to someone else who has absolutely no obligation information, like if it's contractual negotiations, it could be passed on to the opposing negotiator of a contract and do a great disservice to the town. And once you, a lot of times, what I'll do is if I know in advance that if someone wants to have an opinion given on a particular issue, I may prepare a memo in advance and provide it to the commission members. But I would always have a banner on there that this is confidential and subject to the attorney-client privilege, and it'll be discussed in executive session. Well, if we want that information to remain confidential, as the memo would indicate, and which you're entitled to receive, then we can't be discussing it with other folks. And this is something that's always, this is a challenge. It's a challenge for me as well as a challenge for you. When you get into executive session, what can you do? You can't launch off into sort of collateral discussions that might be, weighing heavily on your mind, but are not technically subject to the executive session disclosure. We can't have those discussions. So it has to be for the very specific purpose that's announced at the time we go into executive session. We're kind of moving on a little bit.
Hey, Douglas, I just do have a question for Douglas. I'm relatively new to the commission. How often or have you used executive session for the planning commission? It seems like an infrequent occurrence in our roles. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I think it's not too frequent. Did we need to go into executive session for subdivision? Probably. So maybe once last year, maybe once a year or so that we do it.
Okay.
So it is not terribly frequent.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go through the next couple of sections pretty quickly because there are a couple of others that I want to spend a little bit more time with. For example, on forming subcommittees, South Carolina allows the creation of advisory committees that would concern the preparation and periodic updating of the comprehensive plan. That's permitted. But there aren't any other subcommittees or other advisory committees that are permitted by statute in South Carolina. That's forming subcommittees. I expect you won't have much to be concerned about there, but something I wanted to mention. What are your powers and duties? As far as advisory functions, our mission statement is to engage in a continuing planning program for the physical, social, and economic growth, development, and redevelopment of the city. That's our mission. And we must design plans that promote health, safety, morals, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare, and the efficiency of the city. That seems pretty fundamental, but it's important to keep in mind that's what your functions are. We don't ever run into a problem when we stick to our functions or our mission statement. It's when if we were to depart from that, and there have been instances, not in our city, thankfully, but in other cities and municipalities, where there's a departure from the mission and it gets into collateral matters that we run into problems. So if we keep our mission in mind, it's pretty simple.
I'm embarrassed to ask this question, but where did you read that mission statement from? Where is it? Is that from the state statute or is that in the city code or where is that?
What I just read to you is in the state.
That's the state planning enabling legislation.
Yes, right.
Okay.
That's where I got that from.
That's what I thought, of course.
Right.
I knew that. Thank you.
I knew you did, Doug. You were just testing to see if I knew it.
I am ashamed to admit that I've actually never heard that mission statement. I am going to go revisit it though. Thank you. I knew I would learn many things, and that was the first. Thank you.
Well, gosh, I've been going on for about a half hour or so, and if that's the first thing you
not
learned,
the
I'm
first,
not doing
not
a very
the first.
good job.
That was a misstep, Jim. That's the first of the many that I wanted to just point out.
Yeah, I think you spoke the truth there for a second. All right. We can look at our specific planning activities under the comp plan. Anytime you look at the agenda, you see what your activities are. I'm not going to spend any time going over that. You have some zoning functions, and again, making recommendations on zoning amendments. As long as it falls under the comprehensive plan, there's got to be a response within a certain period of time, and then there has to be a public hearing with the council. Then I get to the next important concept that I want you to walk away with. When you're exercising these prerogatives, or you're exercising the powers and the duties, in some instances, you'll be exercising what I would call quasi-judicial function. Certainly in land development regulation, the plat approval process would fall under that, providing variances, which are rare, that would have to satisfy certain special conditions, undue hardship, not be detrimental to adjacent property of public interest. And of course, you can impose conditions on that. But and are also engaging in the appeals, which may come from the commission straight to the circuit court within 30 days, or appeals from staff to the planning commission within 60 days. Those are some examples of quasi-judicial function. And that will become, I think that's something I want you to keep in mind, because when we get to some of the actions outside the powers, that is going to be of a concern to us. Now, should we, and I know no one here is going to walk outside the lines that we just chatted about, but in the event that a new member comes on and hasn't had this brilliant presentation, and they may wander outside the parameters of powers, we have some risks, as we always do, associated with those meanderings over the line. And we've got the South Carolina Tort Claims Act. It has some good aspects to it. It does protect us from liability, or funds liability, for legislative, judicial, or quasi-judicial actions, which would also include some advisory functions, was an exercise of discretion. And there'll be limitations imposed on the damages. But, always a big but, if we act outside the scope of our power, if we meander across that line, we may not have the benefit of the South Carolina State Tort Claims Act. And it could expose the city to uncapped damages, or individuals to personal liability. So my suggestion is that we stay within the lines, just like when we're driving down the road. There are some things that, the different cases have discussed, and sort of if you wanted to think about examples of when this might occur. I mean, when we're granting a zoning variance, I mean, that's just granting a zoning variance is not problematic as long as it's an appropriate exercise of that power. If we exercise it for an inappropriate purpose, which on that is you know, if you're going to have I guess zoning variances, there are a lot of components that go into that, a lot of risk that inappropriate reasons might be considered. When you're granting a zoning variance, make sure you just walk the line. Don't meander off on some tangential exercise. Just walk the line.
Jim,
Yeah.
question or comment, I guess, maybe a question in here, but
Yeah.
I feel like the most common quasi judicial function that the planning commission does, where they're taking the final action on a case, is the subdivision regulations and approving plats.
Yes.
And I often feel like, there will be a subdivision request. It complies with every standard in the code. But the neighbors in the community don't like it. They show up in droves and
Yeah.
pitchforks to try to get it denied. And I always feel kind of, I feel bad for members of the planning commission because I feel like they may personally not agree with the subdivision or think it's a good idea, and they're certainly hearing it from neighbors. But I feel like they were kind of told or advised that,
Doug? Let me kind of respond to what I anticipate was Doug's question. I always like that because now I get to frame my own question and go ahead and answer it brilliantly. I think what Doug is suggesting, and he's right, this is a real risky area. If we deny the approval of a plat that meets all qualifications. I mean, my guiding principle is if it meets all of the qualifications, approve the plat. I mean, if we do that, then we're not going to run into a problem. And what we don't, because once we kind of, as Doug suggested, and listen, I wouldn't want on some things to be sitting in your chairs and to receive constituent concerns about something that everyone knows might meet all the qualifications, but it's just awful for this particular neighborhood. And people are upset. They call you and they say, you got to vote this down. Well, the bottom line is we got to do what's right. May not be popular, but we have to do what's right. And if it's dots all the I's, crosses all the T's, as far as qualifications are concerned, it's a very, 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 very risky proposition not to approve the plat. What we don't want to do is to have a situation where a court would decide that our decision was arbitrary or capricious. That happens. We don't want that to happen because there are financial ramifications that are associated with that. So I think if we just look at it, the plat, if it meets the qualifications, may be very, very unpopular. My suggestion is, under those circumstances, approve it. Another area where sometimes we can run into, not on this commission, not in our city, but there's no privilege for defamation of character. In some areas, there are other communities in this area where I look at some of the meetings and hear what some of the folks say about, each other or about other people in the community. And I wonder how many times have been sued for defamation. But nevertheless, you know, there's no protection under the Tort Claims Act for defamation, so we just keep that in mind. We also want to make sure that we don't ignore FOIA. Another thing that we don't want to do is when you're making your decision, it kind of gets back to the approval of a plat example that we just had. It's not within your power to determine the validity of an ordinance or the constitutionality of the ordinance. So it would be, it would not be my recommendation that you ever do that. If you ever consider doing that, if you have questions about that, that's a great topic for an executive session. And in executive session, I would say, don't do that. It's not within your power to declare something unconstitutional or to declare something invalid or an ordinance invalid. So I think if we stay away from that, then in these other things, then we're okay under the State Tort Claims Act. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that you're not always going to be in state court. When you do certain things, you end up being in federal court. And one of the things that, if you look at case law, a common cause of action is a federal 1983 cause of action. And we sure want to stay away from that. That's under the Federal Civil Rights Act. And that, you know, that regardless of the initial purpose, this is my editorializing, of 1983, it's been really expanded so that if there's it provides causes of action, private causes of action to citizens who've suffered a loss, for example, due to planning or zoning activities that violate equal protection or violate due process. And they can then mount a 1983 action against the government entity and, importantly, against the individual employee or the individual official that participates in that action. And, you know, basically, you know, for equal protection, it's just doing, it's treating similarly situated folks different from other similarly situated folks. I mean, you want to see uniformity, you want to see consistency in the application of the rule. That's equal protection. Due process is the deprivation of a property right under color of state law without process and without compensation. So, you know, those are fairly general concepts, but things that are important to keep in mind. I mean, especially if we're thinking about, we want to make sure that we follow our rules, follow our procedures. If we do that, we probably can avoid most challenges for equal protection, for due process. And if we treat everybody the same way, excuse me, then, you know, we likely have taken the first step to avoiding an equal protection violation. Those are my general guiding principles. An area that's kind of the object of a bit of confusion, and this kind of falls under ethics, is what do I do if I have a conflict of interest when it comes time to vote? And I've been in many meetings where that's treated differently, but this is the way I believe it ought to be treated. You ought to abstain from voting if you or a member of your immediate family, an associate of yours, or a business of yours has and economic interest in the outcome of what's before you. There shouldn't be any other real reason for abstaining other than what I've said. So it has to be before some issue before you, and it has to be one that has an economic, where there's an economic interest in the outcome of either you, a member of your immediate family, an associate of yours, or a business of yours. If that's the case, then you need to abstain, or my recommendation is abstain. And here, my preference is always, this is not very professionally stated, but if it doesn't look good, don't do it. So if it's close to the line on it, as I've just described it, then don't do it. We don't want to create the impression that we're doing something that's conflicting with the city's best interest. Now, that said, the existence of a conflict, that's only determined by you. I mean, I don't determine a conflict. Doug doesn't determine the existence of a conflict. You determine the existence of the conflict. So as long as you understand when, then it's up to you to do that. You need to do that in writing, and it has to be placed on the record. And then, so that's conflict of interest in voting. Another, and there's some ex-parte communication. Because remember, in some areas, you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. Just like, I mean, judges, they are prohibited from engaging in ex-parte communications because they're performing a judicial function. In other words, they can't talk to a lawyer for one of the parties. They can't talk to one of the parties at a cocktail party about what a case that's in front of them. That would be inappropriate. It would be a violation of the canons of judicial ethics because they can't have ex parte communications with the other party not present. Well, that applies to us when we exercise our quasi-judicial function as well. So we can't have one-on-one discussions with appellants, applicants, or anyone who's going to come before the board. We just don't do that. And I mean, you don't run into any problems if you just get in the habit of, even if you're out at a cocktail party, remember what I said, what happens here, what's said here stays here, keep it there, have a cocktail, relax, and don't engage in those kinds of discussions, and we won't have a problem. This is most important, for example, in deciding appeals, granting variances, exceptions, where the public has a great interest in knowing. The other very important part of this is that from time to time, interested council members may approach. Again, I mean, Isle of Palms is a relatively small community. You might see somebody down at our new marina when it's all built, and you have a beer, and a council member comes up to you and said, Steve, I know this is coming up in front of you next week, and my neighbor Doris said that she's not happy with it. Do you think you could see your way to voting it down? Well, as soon as that happens, then my recommendation to Steve, if he were to call me up, would be to say, Steve, finish your beer and leave. Don't engage that council member in that kind of discussion, especially one that's intended to influence a vote. That's an ex parte communication, and that is prohibited. Now, you also have, and I know Doug keeps track of this, state educational requirements that applies to every one of you. certain hours specified. I think it's 6 hours in the first year, 3 hours after that. And there's subjects that are published in a statute. There are some exemptions. Well, you can tell who writes the laws, but one of the exemptions is for lawyers. I wonder why that get in there. And the other exemption is for professionals that have postgraduate degrees in planning. So if you get a postgraduate degree and it's not in planning, you're not exempt. If you're one of the very few who have a postgraduate degree in planning, then you're exempt. You can either do that or go to law school and join the other 50,000 people in the state who have law degrees. So those are the only people that are exempt. And then there's a certificate of compliance that's provided as well. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take on any questions you have. I hope you've at least I've kind of tickled something in your recollection that will allow you the next time an issue comes up to remember something that I've said. If it does and you have a question, please call Doug, and Doug will get a hold of me if it's needed. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Any
Thank you,
questions
Jim.
of anybody?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
All right. No questions. Thank you, Jim.
You're
We'll see you
welcome.
soon.
All right. Look forward to it.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Bye.
I guess we'll be moving on to old business, the review of the economic elements of the comprehensive plan. I think is where kind of we left off last week.
Yes. So in your packet was the a red line of that element, which is what we talked about last month. I think some of that was the work of Sandy, and we appreciate that.
Right.
And then I think some of that was also the product of the group's analysis of the goals and strategies. So I don't know if I very well could have missed something. Any comments on that section?
Oh, it looked good.
It's good. Thank you, Sandy, for cleaning that up.
If there are no comments,
Looks
or
good.
if we're ready to move on,
I think so.
we could go into housing. And I think that we have traditionally started the review of the element by going over the key issues, goals, and strategies. Do we want to do that? And if so, would one of you be willing to pull up the matrix on that?
Marty, I passed the wand.
That's-
Marty, are you in a position that you could do it? I could actually.
Sure. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, too
okay.
bad.
Hold on, I'll fix that. Not so quick, Marty. I'll fix it. Try that, Marty.
Hey, Douglas, while he's putting that up, do you know when we're going to have access to the new numbers for I think we talked about it a little bit last meeting, but that matrix that's in the plan here that has the different units, whether they're residential, second home, primary residence, business, all that stuff.
Yes. So I'm getting a repeat, but this happens to be kind of a bigger, well, not bigger, but also an interest of the strategic plan. The Ways and Means Committee is also interested in it. So we are working, Debbie, Desiree, myself, we're all working on that now. And so I think we'll have something in the next 30 days or so, kind of detailing that out. We're getting we got data from from Charleston County on the numbers of 6% properties. We then kind of take that pool and we cross it with, of those 6%, how many have a rental license.
Mhm.
And then I think we assume that if you're 6% and you don't have a rental license, that you fall in the pool of second homes. So we're doing that now, and I think that'll be available fairly soon. I'll make myself a note to include that in the next packet, hopefully. So we want to start from key issues. Maintain a high quality of life for the island residents is the first one. The second one is balancing the increasing property values and the livability of the community. Those were our two issues, which I think are generally still applicable and fairly broad. Then that brings us to the first goal under those issues. The city should continuously monitor the effect of development upon the quality of life of the existing permanent residents. And I think, Scott, that gets to your, and this specifically, this first strategy of track the construction trends, including the number of houses demolished, square feet, bedrooms, and bathrooms of new houses. We have, I will say that we have done that exercise specifically on new construction, and not only the size of things, but also kind of a look back on what has happened to that house after it gets built. Does it turn into a primary residence, a second home, or a short-term rental? I think that's probably something that would be good to continue to do, and we're probably due. We should do that now, probably with this kind of third analysis. Any comments on that? I would say that that's a good, to me, that's a good goal. It probably needs to be done, so I might put it as yellow. I don't know what the group thinks about what a measure of success would be, but I think that that we want it to basically maintain as it historically has been. Would the group agree with that? Scott, you're on mute.
Is it sort of a maintain the current ratios and then we can maybe put some TBD in there to, once we find out what those are and see how they're mapping up against the growth from the last decade?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Some measurable metric in here. And we're gonna have, if we're gonna have the data next month, we can maybe come back to it and have that conversation.
Hey, Doug, I just have a question. In several places in this section, the concept of demolished comes up so many times. It sounds like every house on the island is being demolished. How many, we have 4,000 housing units. How many are really demolished every year?
It's a lot. I mean, I would say that it's kind of over the years, it has been a primary point of concern with the housing stock specifically, that we are in this transitional phase of going from the old kind of 1,200 square foot house, and they're being replaced by much larger houses, much larger capacity. I think it's something on the magnitude of 20, 30 houses a year.
Is that consistent? What percentage does that make up of new housing starts? Because I'm guessing
Very
unless it's
high, yeah.
unless it's take vacant lots out of the properties that have a home on it, are those permits, does the 20, 30 represent 50, 80? I'm guessing most of the new construction that is not on a vacant lot is a demo or a reno.
Yes, I would agree I mean, I think the majority of newly constructed houses is happening where an old smaller house used to be,
Okay.
and not on a vacant lot, just because there aren't many vacant
There aren't
lots
many,
left.
yeah.
And I think it's always, it's interesting that people always kind of think of the island as being built out, and but the flip side of that coin is, if you look at the community and you consider that everything that's kind of older than 20 years, I mean, it seems to be things as new to me. I live in a 1920s house. So when I see people tearing down a house that's only 20 or 30 years old, it's kind of mind blowing to me. But you definitely see the island in a different light. You see it as, if you kind of know that anything less than several thousand square feet and 20 years old is a prime candidate for demolition, you put a different lens on when you see the community, because
Well, and isn't and maybe Sandy can speak to this for some of the real estate people, but aren't most of these homes, the ones that are aging, and this is pretty typical in a situation like this, aren't they pretty much going for lot value?
Yes and no. It's a funny market now, but yeah, I would say 2-3 years ago, absolutely, and that was I think the case. However, now it's just, where can I buy something, tear it down, and get what I want? I think the whole mindset's changed in our current market today, 2020, 21 moving forward.
Yeah. And do you see that accelerating, Sandy? That's going to be the buy and tear down with the housing inventory aging here on the island?
Yes, because you've got a lot of properties actually that went through Hugo and were patched together back then. They have issues now. Termites. I mean, you got the mayor's house. I think he's going to tear his down, and that was a termite issue. I mean, there's a mixed bag, but mostly it's because people can't find what they want. They're affluent enough to be able to come into a community like this and buy what they want and create it, all within the zoning that we currently have. So
Yeah. And also major renovation of some of these homes that don't get torn down. So they're generally getting such an entire facelift. It's like a new home on an old footprint.
I would add to that last year, when the city significantly changed the flood regulations to address the new flood maps, which were lowering the base flood elevations. At that time, it started the conversation about the 50% rule and the fact that so many houses were being torn down, really as just a result of having to comply with that rule. And the council at the time, under the recommendation of the Planning Commission, watered down that 50% rule so that it would make it easier for owners to keep those houses, maintain them, and fix them up. And I have been shocked at how kind of meaningful that change has ended up being. There are more houses being preserved than I remember ever. And it may be that, they used to just keep putting Band-Aids on until they were going to be torn down. But now you do see a number of houses getting significant investment into them. And
Are they being added on to,
Yes.
Douglas? Yeah.
yes, kind of facelifted, added to kind of every combination of that.
I mean, I don't know if you have this data, and I may have raised it once or twice, but I wonder if there's a way we can get at hospitality rooms and residential rooms, bedrooms. Because I just have a hunch, just based on what I've seen since we've been here, the residential room inventory has been pretty much increasing fairly dramatically. Whereas the residential rooms, there are some bigger homes being built, but there's a lot of hospitality rooms being added to the island, which is going to impact everything on the island. I don't know, Sandy, you probably see that inventory, I guess, well, even with a hotel, with the additional 135 coming online. And then the big homes coming in and that are rental properties, the investors.
Don't see it increasing significantly. It's been a slow drip. And I don't have access to the numbers the way I did in years past. We used to be able to go on and count everybody's property through the different websites and things, but those aren't as fruitful either. So I don't know how to get the count other than what Douglas has for the number of properties in total on vacation rentals. And a lot of that's 1-2 bedroom condominiums. Those are always going to be on the rental program to some extent. And then, the housing, we're losing properties to second homes. They're being taken off the market. We're not gaining. I think the license issue has flatlined somewhere around 1,600 units in total.
Yeah, I think the character of the people moving to the island in light of the pandemic have been people just escaping densely populated areas to more open areas that don't have the problems. You talk, and it's not just here, it's just about anywhere. I've got clients who have property in the mountains, and they were saying that property doesn't stay vacant for long before there's an offer. And to the point here in Charleston, I've been hearing that by the time the property has hit the market, it's already been called on. So people are trying to find the pre-sales as a means to acquiring property, either it be raw land or a home. But I think a lot of these people, since it's people with an intent to relocate, not necessarily just invest in. I think that's why those numbers are kind of stagnating. But that's for each house that gets built as a rental. There are probably others, that maybe 2, that are being either built for a permanent new resident or a second home person who may not be renting. That's anecdotal from my client list anyway.
Hey, Douglas, when was that 50% rule reversed?
Well, it wasn't reversed. It was what happened is the cumulative aspect of it was taken away. So it used to be that you couldn't do more than 50% over a 5-year period. And that got changed to say you couldn't toggle over 50% with any one project, so that an owner could do 10 projects in 5 years and each project be 49%. And that happened about a year ago now, early 2020.
So in just a year's time, you've seen a big impact?
Yes. Yeah. And big. I would say that I do not recall more than a couple a year of those houses being kind of significantly um, fixed, renovated. There would be an occasional kind of lipstick job that would get done, but I mean, you are seeing major work happening to these older houses.
I know for right around me on Waterway Boulevard, there have been three major overhauls that um, they must have gone right up to that 49% rule, and then they were back in the properties. One more recently over on 28th, where they added garages and detached garages and all kinds of interesting things. I think they tore up the driveway, the concrete, so they meet the pervious and impervious ratio. But I've seen a lot of it that in the last year, where people are buying the 21st to 41st, parting it down the waterway homes. The JC Long homes is what we called them, forever, renovating them and moving in. It's all, most of it's all
Mhm.
families. So I'm glad to see it.
There were also positive, if that's the right term, but the lowering of the flood elevations is also having a positive impact on that class of property, because the way the new ordinances work is if you're in an existing home and you're above the new FEMA flood requirements, the 50% rule does not apply to you. So that's a lot of that too is a lot of properties that Marty, your whole area is now an X zone.
I li-
I think your property probably is out of the floodplain entirely now.
Um,
I don't know if you've checked it specifically, but kind of that, just off of Palm, um, for three or four houses, there's a ridge there.
yeah, we're on that ridge for sure between Palm and Cameron.
Yeah, so you are either out of it, or and really all of the properties around you that are existing would
Yeah, I
be
got
out of
that.
the floodplain,
Yeah, I got that letter recently that said I didn't have to have it anymore.
which is kind of crazy. But and Scott, your area too is all out of the
Yeah, we
floodplain.
went X, we went, I think, total X.
Yeah. So it is interesting.
So even though you're in the X zone, so the 50%, if you're compliant to the flood elevation, then you're not subjected to the 50% rule, even though
That
we've got the 13-foot requirement.
that's correct. The
Okay,
13-foot requirement applies to new construction.
all right.
It is, I swear every year, every passing year, the matrix gets more complicated of what you can and can't do. You can attest to that, right, Ron?
Oh, yeah.
You're on the
It's,
planning commission and an architect, and I'm in the same boat. I have
yeah,
to reread it every few
every
days
time.
yeah, to polish back up. Are we ready on the next one? 612, continually assess ordinances which limit the size and width of houses and the amount of impervious surface on the island. This is something that the planning commission, I feel like, did um, really the most work that they've done probably ever was last year and the year before, where, and we'll also get to the next strategy too, but we reduced the lot coverage from 40 to 35 for houses with sewer, and we reduced it um, from 40 to 30 for houses on septic, and we require all new hardscaping to be pervious regardless of coverage. So I feel like that those changes kind of put the community as about aggressive as any community in the area in terms of limiting impervious surfacing. So I would say that we're green there,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I don't measure of success. Any ideas on that one? I mean, I would hope that at some point there would be a reduction in impervious surfacing on the island overall. I don't know if we'll ever get it to actually go down, but I mean, it was going. I think it was kind of going up at a very significant clip, and we've probably flattened that curve down a little bit.
There you go. You could put that on there, flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Have you guys had a lot of struggles with enforcement of that or re-education
No.
of contractors or?
No, it is a constant, it's a constant information session. A lot of plans get redone. A lot of folks miss that. But I wouldn't say it's problematic. It's just a constant kind of education on what the codes will allow.
And I think, so much of that density or the limitation of impervious coverage stems from the concern of flooding. So I think that would be a measure of success as well. The measure would be the decrease in surface runoff and flooding problems within the community. If we've done all this and everything's still a mess, then it's not enough. Or, if we've done it in line with everything else we're doing, and the streets are dry, the roads are dry, the people's backyards aren't ponds, and we've probably hit the right toggle.
That's a good point. And I don't know if it's worth mentioning in the strategy but it may be just a good point to make is that this is something that we're going to have professional help after this RFP. This is something that we've asked that the consultant that successfully gets that project to just look at what we're currently doing, look at that in terms of they will really have useful data on the existing system and the capacity of that system and what it can kind of tolerate. So we should be able to get some additional insight on whether or not we're doing enough in that regard.
Did you say you want me to put that in the strategy though?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
I don't think so. I think it's just good to note that it's kind of a project underway that will help that.
Can you guys see what I'm typing here, or do I need to make that font bigger?
I'm,
Everybody good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. My audio keeps going out too for some reason. So if it seems like I'm not engaging, it's just because I can't hear you.
So we ready for 621?
Yes.
Well, the goal 6.2, improve water quality associated with residential properties. So we, just to give you a frame of reference, almost everything we talk about is water quantity. How much water is running off of a property. This one is talking about the quality of the water. So, things like, as you see there, like septic systems not functioning properly in an area of flooding problems would be bad. So I think that's still a good a good strategy and a good goal.
So I'll just point out the cross-reference to goal 3.2, I guess, at this point.
I think that's good. Improve water
Just-
quality.
Just so we don't, so there's no redundancy.
Did our numbering change? Did you just check that? It is still 3.2, right? Yes.
Seems to be.
Yep. Okay, good. Strategy 621, amend the zoning ordinance to limit the density of development allowed on property not serviced by public sewer system. This is actually, it was done to some degree. I don't know if we want to say that it's complete and eliminate it, but well, two things. After the Forest Trail subdivision was considered, and not that subdivision used septic systems, but the ability to subdivide a lot at all serviced by a septic system was eliminated from the code. So you can't subdivide a property, so you can't increase the number of lots in terms of density. The other thing is what we just referenced, that the zoning code shrunk the size of the house and the coverage of a house serviced by a septic system to 30% of the lot size. So I would tend to think that we have achieved that strategy. I don't know if we want to leave it in there. I mean, we could kind of always keep it in there as a reminder and something to look towards.
Well, does it go from, since you've already amended it, Douglas, does it go from maybe the wording changes to, monitoring the results of the ordinance to see if further enhancements are needed or something to that effect?
Yeah, maybe that would be appropriate.
Sorry, say again one more time.
So instead, go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead, Douglas. No, you got the words. Go ahead.
So instead of amend the zoning ordinance, just say monitor the effect of the zoning ordinance that limits. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah.
I think so, because it's fairly recent, been a couple of years, and with the, again, with future development, you may or may not need to revisit it, but.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we're green there. Measure of success. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, the goal really isn't to limit the house sizes and density. The goal really was to discourage the use of septic tanks. Measure of success could be the implementation of additional sewer taps, perhaps.
Yeah, how many grinder pumps and new feeds does the sewer company?
Yeah, we're trying to get away from that too. But
I mean, Douglas, with what's with the remaining empty lots and with the existing inventory the way it is the measure of success that there's only X amount of, are you seeing new houses going to septic or to the sewer?
It is fairly rare. I don't know that I've seen more than a handful use a septic system since the passage of that limit that would hold them to only 30% floor to area ratio. It's certainly not happening on the smaller lots.
I mean, would a measure of success be no new net septic systems on the island? And when I say net, you pull one out, you pull one.
Yep.
or something to that effect, just something to shoot at.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a good one. Be challenging. I'm just trying to think of actually, going back to this and analyzing it. Trying to quantify if we're meeting that measure.
Well, if we got 1,400 today, 5 years from now, when you do this again, if it's 1,400,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Water and Sewer Commission would be a source of those. They kind of had to reverse engineer their numbers to come to that. But yes, that could be a way that we would do it. We ready for the next strategy? Educate owners of septic systems in the proper maintenance and encourage owners to have their septic systems checked, serviced according to established standards. I can tell you we're not doing that really in any sense. I don't think. I mean,
So we want to put it red for now, or we might be able to put some effort on it, or?
yeah, certainly would be red. Trying to think of how that would even kind of think back in terms of when that was written, how it was expected that would be done. Because quite honestly, the city
It's not your job.
is never aware of it. The city, so it couldn't really be a targeted education.
Are there, you probably know this, I wouldn't know this, but are there hot spots or known areas where septics are becoming a problem, or because of the water table or anything that need to be, do we want to try to target to some hot spots or something?
I would say that we have areas that we know are lower lying, that we can see from the topographical maps that they're low, and we know that there are septic systems in there. So I think we kind of have our suspicions that that septic systems in those areas would be challenging.
Who would be the authority on the established standards?
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm kind of getting at or what I'm struggling with is that this is in the health department. It's in their wheelhouse. It would be somewhat, out of my jurisdiction to kind of get into, maintenance or education of septics. I would be unqualified, and everybody in our office would be unqualified to educate people about their septic systems. That
Now,
is DHEC's wheelhouse.
would we even have the capability to encourage DHEC to do that? Since that really is their
I mean, I guess
purview.
I'm wondering if DHEC had kind of their own publications, we could certainly just put the postage on the publication and mail it.
Yeah, I think the strategy is in education. So it's really mailings and things like that, and identifying, even through the Water and Sewer Commission, who's getting water, who's not getting sewer. So therefore you can assume they're on septic. Even if you just did mailings to those people saying, hey, just a reminder, you need to have your septic maintained, and here's a DHEC publication that tells you what to do.
Yeah, or post it on the website.
Exactly. Yeah, a better approach. But I think all we're trying to do is educate. I agree. We can't enforce. We can't be much heavier-handed than that. But just a general posting says here. Most people don't have the slightest idea.
I agree. I doubt many people even know there is a standard out there. So just somehow circulating a reference to that data will be something.
Some small percentage of people will say, gee, I feel guilty, I should do it.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of folks that have septic systems, and they're more than aware if they have problems, because when it rains, they can't use it. So they're calling for help, and the folks that typically do the service of the systems are extremely well educated to the DHEC standards and will educate the people. So I think there's several avenues by which folks with septic systems get educated pretty quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree for those that are experiencing issues, but for those that systems function perfectly well, I mean, if there's not an issue, then there's not an issue, but maybe there's some sort of maintenance schedule that's recommended that people just don't even know about. I don't know. Just
Anybody aware of anything from DHEC on that? I'll certainly reach out. I have never seen anything. It makes me wonder if there is such a notice or publication on.
I'll do some checking, but the issue is not to wait till you have a problem. That's the only issue. There is maintenance that prevents your leach field from going bad and other things. So it really is preventive maintenance. I understand those that have a problem know they have a problem, but you want to avoid that.
Well, let's leave it in there, and we'll just kind of see what we can uncover in terms of what's even out there and the feasibility of doing it.
Sure.
I would think that if DHEC doesn't have anything, that this may be an impossible strategy, because I think they're going to be the only ones that would be able to meet that strategy, or they would at least have to provide something that would give us something to mail, or so let's look into. I don't have any issue with the strategy. I just don't want to have something in there that we cannot realistically
Sure.
meet. So let's look on how we could do that, and I'll do that. So this is 623, monitor the amount of impervious surface on residential lots. We are certainly doing that if there is a project involved. Anybody who does any kind of building or construction has to produce surveys, and the surveys have to, surveyor needs to indicate the percentage of and the amount of impervious surfacing. Now, we are not doing it, and that may be what this, I don't know if the strategy is suggesting that we do it kind of island wide, getting back to the strategies above of kind of a net decrease in impervious surfacing. We are not doing it island wide. And that is something that's an interesting question. That's something that that Charleston County, when they began the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, which the NPDES program that they handle for the city, they actually used aerial photography. They had to mass assign bills to people based on the percentage of impervious surfacing. And this was commercial lots, not residential lots. But I do know that they somehow kind of electronically determined the amount of impervious surfacing on commercial lots throughout the entire county. And that was a major project that they undertook. I wonder if the same could be done for residential lots. And I wonder if that's even, I don't know, does the group think that's a worthwhile endeavor to we're getting it on new construction, we're monitoring it on new construction to be sure it's compliant, but we're not doing it kind of community wide, and probably be pretty challenging to do so.
But I mean, it's being monitored on anything that's even essentially been touched. Um, if you're doing an addition or anything, you're going to have that information, and the adjustments will be made. Anything that hasn't really been built in the last 10 years, probably just by nature compliant, because well, maybe 15 years. I don't know how imperative it is. I think that information will get caught up if things keep on renovating like they have been.
What is
You
the oh, sorry, Ron.
No,
I'm just curious. So, if we were to do some sort of data collection on this, Douglas, what's the penalty for somebody? Let's say, somebody buys a house and they've got a gravel drive because they were up against the max impervious surface, and then they have it paved because they didn't. Maybe it's ignorance. Maybe they just didn't know. What happens if they're caught or whatever? Is there a penalty or a fine?
We've never gotten to that. It could, so ultimately it would be $1,000 a day. We do periodically have somebody that we catch, that we're aware of it. We notify them and we give them 30 days to tear it out. We've never had somebody not tear it out, but we would have the ability to start fining them $1,000 a day if it stayed put.
Most of your contractors are conforming to the regulations and pulling permits before they do. What is the dollar limit for, you have to have a through the department, Douglas?
$1,000.
So, if you're pouring concrete, you're probably hitting $1,000 or more.
Well, nobody's pouring concrete now.
that's right.
Yeah. I don't think a contractor is going to risk his license for a Sunday morning pour or something, however you used to be able to do it. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, if there's a weakness here, it's what Marty. So to Sandy's point, the newly constructed projects, that's very closely watched, and we have control over their power and their certificate of occupancy and their construction licenses and all that. So that one is very tightly watched, monitored, and controlled. If there is a weakness here, it would be the kind of weekend warrior that goes undetected in his backyard with, and I don't know that it could be much to go unnoticed, but and we have had a couple. We've had a couple that they got their CO, they got their CO, and they literally thought that was the rule. They said, "Well, we got our CO, and we understand that once we get our CO, we're fine to do whatever we want. We've been told that." Like, no, no, that's not. You're understanding incorrectly. So it does happen, but once they're notified of the problem, we've never had a compliance problem if we're aware. So I don't know. Does the group think that that strategy, the important part of that strategy, is monitoring work as it happens? Because I would say if that is the strategy, that's certainly happening, and we're in good shape there. It's well documented. We're keeping all of that data. If the strategy was to kind of do what we're talking about that the county did with commercial lots and have aerial photography giving us impressions as to whether or not we're reducing coverage, I don't think we're doing that. And I don't think that would be that might be kind of like the strategy above it, where it may just be a reach too far to really realistically get to.
I would agree that we or that we monitor as construction takes place on that front end, basically. Surveys, Douglas, for the formulas. I don't see after the fact monitoring being number one, being fiscally responsible. It's a pretty big job right now, and I would say that well over 90 some odd percent are compliant. So at what point do you invest massive amounts of money to determine that everybody is compliant and only have a handful that aren't? I mean, I don't see it as giving us a very good return on our environmental investment. So
I agree. And two, some of these non-compliant structures might be 15, 20 years old, which you can't force them into compliance. They've done nothing wrong. So it really is only in new construction. And, we're monitoring, William and Douglas, monitor for compliance of building construction all the time. So I can't see that that's not already in effect happening in retrospect. It's kind of hard to pour a driveway overnight. You got to get the old one out of there. You got to form it up. You ought to really tamp it down. And, our Mr. William knows everything that's going on. Nothing gets by him. And I just can't see somebody sticking in a non-compliant impervious surface on the city. And if they did, he'd probably know it come Monday, and while that concrete's still wet, and then you do have it. So, yeah, I think the intent
ones
is
that we
good,
found,
but
it was that way,
excuse
where
me?
it was the ones that we've had come up have been exactly that, where they poured something.
Yeah,
And one, I think William pulled up and said, what are you doing? And the other
yeah,
one, a neighbor called on Monday and said, over the weekend this happened. So I think it's fairly.
yeah. I mean, he's probably got I don't know how many houses we got under permit right now. Um, but he's got to be burning some miles on his truck, and so he's through the whole entire island every day, I'm sure.
He is.
And he's got a pulse on what's going on. So I just think it's the intent of the strategy is fine with new construction. I think trying to go back in hindsight over 5 and 10-year-old projects is probably not worth the effort.
Well, and to add to a point earlier, I mean, we're going to have this master plan, and we're going to task them
Yeah.
with looking at kind of just taking a high level view at it, and let us know if they see something that we could, if there's could be that the professionals in the field would see something that we could do there. So maybe they would have suggestions as to what we may be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So is this one good as it is
Yep.
then? Okay.
I think so. I think what you've written there is good.
How many maybe this is not a question where there's an answer, but I'm just curious how many lots, like side by side lots, exist where somebody has one house, where they bought two lots and built one house, and if there's a possibility that some of those are going to be coming up to be split back out. Is there anything that can be talked about or done there?
I don't think so. I mean, so for I know I'm hearing what Marty's saying, and just for the benefit of the group, occasionally it will happen where back years ago somebody bought two lots, they put one house right across a property line. Today we wouldn't allow them to do that because it doesn't comply with the setback regulations. We'd make them abandon that line. But 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, they would just build a house right over a property line, and then they have never abandoned that property line. So by the letter of the law, they have 2 lots. They've always had 2 lots and they continue to have 2 lots. They take down the house, and then they build 2 houses on their 2 lots. Um, I, I don't know when that's going to happen. I get the inquiry when it comes up on the market and it shows up on the deed as lots 15 and 16, as an example. We then get the owner of the property or the seller of the property to do a title search to see if anything's ever been done in the chain of that title that would potentially have the effect of abandoning that line, because it can be done either by recording a plat or by a note on a deed. And they report back to us that they've done that title search and the line has never been modified or abandoned. If it ever has been abandoned, then it's abandoned forever and you can never put it back in. If it never has been abandoned, the legal advice that we've always heard is that is through and through 2 lots, and there's nothing that the subdivision regulations or zoning could do about it. And I would assume that would be. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, Marty, I don't think that there's anything we could do about that, and I don't know of a way to identify the ones. I guess in hindsight, it's obvious, from looking at an area map when it's happened. You look at all of a uniform row of lots, and then there's one in the middle that's bigger than the rest. I guess it's somewhat obvious after the fact, but I never know of them until they come up for sale or something else like that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. I mean, the only reason I even bothered to mention it is because that's one thing I have seen recently where, in a very specific case, that happened. And just looking at all of our goals and strategies here, it really walks in the opposite direction. When you turn one 3-bedroom JC Long into 2 6-bedroom McMansions, then
Yes, I would agree with that, and it certainly is disruptive to the community around it that's gotten used to the idea. Most of the time, I think people just have no idea that,
Yeah.
oh wow, that's 2 lots, and it always has been 2 lots.
Okay. So does anybody have an idea of anything to add to this section then, or are we pretty good with it?
Do we want to hold off on? So the next thing I think we would do is look at the text of that housing, of that element. It does talk about a third, which we have agreed will vet out soon to see if that still holds true. I don't know. To me, the blurb about the Biggert Waters Act, that was a very kind of hot topic there for a while. I don't think it. To me, that's kind of a past. I mean, there are still implications. There's this kind of steadily ramping up flood insurance premiums of these houses at I think it's 25% a year. But I think now with these new flood maps and huge parts of the island coming out of the floodplain, that's probably a more than offsetting change. So I personally would think it would be appropriate to remove that paragraph altogether. I don't know if we want to get into talking about, because it has generated some confusion, but this circumstance of the FEMA flood maps lowering the floodplain, the city then enacting a more stringent requirement that elevates, that requires some elevation above and beyond what FEMA has done. I would say, if anything, we erase the existing paragraph and replace it with something, but that may be too I don't know if that's too kind of tailored to just the architects and builders in the world, and if anybody else would have an interest in it. Might be too nitpicky to get into a comprehensive plan. I don't know.
No, I agree,
My
Doug.
only, oh, sorry.
I agree, Doug. I was thinking strike that whole paragraph. I don't think it's that relevant anymore. Like I said, when this was written 5 years ago, it was. And I think getting into the minutia of the details of the flood, it's so varied now, with the elevations going down and the cities going up. So I kind of agree. I don't know if that belongs in this plan.
Too kind of individualized.
Yeah. Sorry, Sandy.
If anything, the only thing I think you would want to reference is that many of the properties are subject to the federal regulations with regards to flood insurance. And just, that's what you were trying to communicate in the overall plan, that, yeah, we live in a part of the country, a barrier island that's subject to flood insurance.
So, so Sandy, you're saying that first paragraph, I'm sorry, the first sentence of that paragraph is still relevant and maybe important to.
I think so.
This may be a personal thing. I have always liked, and I somehow get a weird kick out of telling people that I'm explaining the fact that the city went above and beyond the FEMA standards. And Ron probably may have been the only one that was on the commission at the time that change was made, but the planning commission went through a process of determining what the floodwaters of Hurricane Hugo were. And Ron will remember that it was all taken by a survey of a rusty nail on a planning commissioner's stairs. He knew exactly where the salt water had come to because the stairs rusted, the nails in the stairs rusted from that tread down, and they didn't have rust on that tread up. And so the planning commission, I think, wisely said, take that elevation, add 1 foot for good measure, and that should become the basis for future flood protection. And that ends up being 13 feet above mean sea level. So I don't know if we wanted to get to just a quick explanation that there is regardless of the FEMA maps, there is a minimum standard that roughly equates to the Hurricane Hugo floodwaters. It kind of explains the logic. And as soon as people hear that, I think it makes sense to them. They may be somewhat annoyed when they first hear, well, no, we still have a higher standard. But then as soon as they hear, well, Hugo hit that standard, then I think they see the logic of it, and it basically makes sense to them, and then they want to comply because they realize that anything lower than that would have been inundated in Hugo. So maybe we just add kind of an interesting sentence there that leaves the spirit of that sentence intact, but takes out the Biggert water reference.
Yeah, I think having a discussion about the city having enacted a 13-foot elevation makes sense to put in here, but getting into the intricacies of the flood insurance, I think just starts to get a little too convoluted.
Okay. Does that everybody kind of agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Next paragraph is talking about, and I do remember there being some kind of laboring over this idea that older homes have been made less desirable, that term. And I think it was, the old term was functionally obsolete. The prior planning commission didn't like that term and put in less desirable in the current market. I think it's still a relevant point. I don't know if we want to change that or add to it. Any thoughts there?
Just tells part of the storyline of the island.
Douglas, on that last sentence, is it replaced by updated structures or updated and larger structures? which goes to that whole permeable, I guess, well, you've
Yeah.
limited it. Never mind. It's probably irrelevant.
I think generally you're right, Scott, that it is almost always a larger structure.
Yeah, I would.
Maybe we don't want to acknowledge that in our
Yeah, I
plan.
would say that is the case. Is that a characteristic that needs to be pointed out? I mean, if you're taking down a 1,200 square foot JC Long house and you're going back probably with a minimum of that footprint at an elevation and adding a second story, so you're probably doing 2,400 at a minimum.
It goes to the permeability. I think where you're going, Sandy, if these houses are 1,200 and you can stay way within the 35% rule and put a house that's 2 or 3 times as big on the lot. I think. Is that right, Douglas?
Yes.
No, the inner island lots are fairly sizable, and I think you could put, a multiple of, and I think you're seeing it. The new ones that are going in are multiples the footprint of the old house and are still compliant.
Yes.
So simply adding a couple words in there is sufficient.
Sure.
And then the last paragraph, I think that's still, so it does talk a little bit about, I think it's important we talk about the septic system issue a bit there. It does get into the fact that the water and sewer department has limited capacity. They are in the process and actually got approved last night by the Board of Zoning Appeals to construct a new facility at the corner of 41st and Waterway Boulevard that will make that point moot. So we may anticipate that and go ahead and take out the sentence. Well, and there's several sentences there about facing a dilemma.
We also have a pretty good discussion about the same subject on page 35, where we talk about sewers and septic. And
Yeah.
in some cases, it's worded a little better there without the dramatic language of dilemmas and other things.
Yeah. So do we want to maybe, and this is always a conundrum of the plan. Do we mention it in multiple places, or do we, because it does, the issue touches on multiple elements. Maybe we have a simple explanation here and have a more kind of a deeper discussion in the other element.
Yeah, like I said, I think the other discussion is a little more in depth and makes sense where it's at in the whatever that section's called, public facilities or something. Maybe we just reference that there already is a discussion in that section, because it is relevant to the housing market, but it's without repeating the whole thing again here, maybe we just reference the other one.
Right.
Kind of see page. What
think it's
Steve? What was the page?
Page 35 has a pretty good discussion, and the question mark I had was about capacity, but what you just said, maybe we need to update the whole discussion of capacity if it looks like we're going to be expanding capacity.
Yeah, that's going to cease to be an issue here in the fairly near future.
Yeah, because even in this discussion on 35, it still kind of leaves it open that there's some capacity that might be available from Wild Dunes, and so we probably need to clean that up a little bit too.
Yeah.
All right. So did I reflect that accurately?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Right.
Marty, we're going to enlist you for all. You only had to do the matrix, but now you're going to put you on all editing details.
I made you look good last week, Marty, by doing not much.
Yeah, when we
Last
suffered
month.
through Scott, we got. I'm kidding, Scott.
This Bluebeam software is pretty easy to make edits. I'm just not as good using it, but there's a ton of tools.
Yeah, you're doing good.
So did you guys want to add something here or just leave that? I wasn't sure what I heard about.
I think
So
that's
I-
fine. It's expanded elsewhere. So
Oh, that's what, did somebody say reference the other section? Or is
Yes, make, kind of see page 35 note.
And that's in
And
the,
I'll take a,
Yeah, in the community facility section on page 35, there's a wastewater treatment section. So I think, and it's spelled out pretty well there. All that needs a little cleaning up, but it's better there.
okay.
Good, thank you, you got it.
And
all
we
right,
were-
so let's, I think that gets us through housing. We will have some data and we'll make some edits for your review at the next meeting to fully wrap that element up.
Hey,
Scott, you have
Douglas?
a question? Yeah.
Well, yeah, not really much to do. Well, it's about this topic, but with the, I don't know if the administration's looking at this at the city or if there's something we can or should do. But with the printing press going on up in Washington, they just passed the 1.9 trillion. And I think 350 billion of that's coming to the states and munis, but then they're talking about an infrastructure bill coming in behind it. Is there something we could do to find out if there's a way to maybe see if any of that money could apply to any of the projects that you've been thinking about, like the sewer and?
Yes. So we do have Thomas and Hutton as part of that request for proposals and their work with us already. They are,
grants, or-
yes, they are plugged in and they are basically at each grant opportunity, they are giving us kind of I guess basically a proposal with a likelihood of success. So kind of a cost benefit, it would cost you $10,000. We think you have a 30% chance of getting X number of dollars. So they are doing that now. And we have had discussions with them about basically accelerating that effort. And I think they feel they're kind of forecasting that that our success rate should be going up. Our likelihood of success should be going up here in the near future. We've been a little bit handicapped because we haven't had a fully developed plan. So, we haven't really had kind of shovel ready projects that we could say, hey, this is the cost, this is how it's going to go, this is what it's going to look like, this is the benefit. So we're getting over that hurdle. We're also think we're anticipating just more money in the pot to be available to us. So, yes, I think we're pretty well positioned. We also, and I don't know what the current status is, but the city has had a goal of, and it's actually in the budget currently, to hire a full-time grant writer to more aggressively be able to pursue these things. So I think the wheels are in motion to go after that money. Now, to your point, should that be reflected in the comprehensive plan? I feel like we
Yeah, I
do.
wasn't suggesting that, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking that with this in the pipeline, I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of competition for dollars, and some of the projects like the island-wide sewer and everything.
Yes.
Would be, I don't want to say, I think that would be probably a positive match for what they're talking about.
And I do know that the Water and Sewer Commission is in the same position. I mean, they also are pretty
Would they
aggressively
be the ones to go after that money, or?
We have talked about the potential of sharing the effort. It we can do some things, they can do some things, and we want to be well coordinated when they come up, and that has been one of the benefits of having the same designer for both of us, because they're having the same people kind of analyze what's available and choosing the appropriate agency to task with going after them. They got a sizable grant for this work that just got approved last night, which was good.
Right?
So if we're ready to talk about the master plan project, only some kind of details have been added to this, and I will say that I went before the Public Works Committee of City Council last week and had a very good discussion about this project. I didn't want us to have kind of done this in a vacuum without council's involvement at all. So went to them and talked about it, and they felt like it was kind of the right direction, and they endorsed it, and they're ready to go. So we are at the final. We need to attach a contract to this, and we're basically it's ready to go out the door. But I did just want to put it. It's a little bit polished up since the last time you all saw it, and it has been through council. They've endorsed it. So I just wanted to give kind of a quick update on that. Yeah, the dates. We may need to push our dates back a bit. Any comments on that? I wasn't really expecting much other than to just tell you that it should be out the door soon. I have talked to a couple of different engineering firms, and they seem to be excited to be able to give us proposals to just remind you. That would be that's kind of the sequence that we've considered, is that we would this group would interview them, come up, try to score them, make a recommendation, score them, and then I think from the top couple of respondents, we would get pricing per scope item, and then make a recommendation to city council. So that's the plan.
So I had highlighted these things. I was just remembering now. I guess I was confused as to whether there would be interviews for sure.
So I think, go ahead, Marty.
I mean, I heard what you just said, but when I was reading through it, I didn't, with this statement, it confused me a little bit.
So I think that's talking about, we may go with somebody other than your firm and not tell you about it.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
I gotcha. So that's not implying that could not be, like they would.
That we're going to enter into a contract and you not know about it?
No, I mean, for me, I just was confused as to whether or not there would be an interview process, or there might be a decision made just based on proposals.
Yeah, that's not the plan. I think the plan, yeah. I think that language, I think that's boilerplate language that basically says we may or may not let you know that your firm didn't get picked, even though I think we do, somewhere in there, we do say we'll keep you apprised of the progress.
Okay.
But that certainly is the plan. And Marty, I guess we probably talked about this primarily while you were last month when you were absent. But that is the kind of, that's the plan. We would get put it out, get responses, let you all see the responses, pick the ones that you want to talk to. We generally have talked to who you think are the top 2 or 3. Maybe it's been as many as 4. Then you grade them based on what you feel, how closely you feel their responses met the city's needs. Based on those grades, we will probably then get the top 2 to give us pricing or their estimate of pricing on each scope item. And then based on all of that information, you would make a recommendation to city council. And it may be, we did talk at pretty good length that we probably will award the first kind of chunk of scope items. And I think we talked a little bit about where the break would be, but the scope items are numbered 1 through 13, and I think we thought that there might be a natural break between that they do the first. Steve, do you remember that?
Yeah, I
1
think you gotta
through
get,
6, 7.
you gotta get to at least 5. You gotta get to the first deliverable, which is kind of a review of all the existing data,
yeah.
a little bit of field work. I think that would be the first deliverable that would then set the stage for where you go from there.
Yeah. So we'd get the pricing for all of them, but then the recommendation may very well be enter into an agreement for this firm for items 1 through 5. Then they would give you a deliverable. You'd kind of then analyze the progress and make a decision at that point on pursuing the next phase. That's been the way that we're currently working with the Outfalls project, and I think it's worked pretty well. There hasn't been a guarantee of us continuing with the project, so I think it's been fair for both sides. And if there are no comments, I think we're good on this one. We'll just we'll get these out, and I would hope that whoever responds would have good ideas about how they would tackle our issues. All right, we've been here for probably long enough. Anybody have a
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all. Have a good night.
See you later.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Douglas.
Bye.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Night.